Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
With great power, there must also come great responsibility is a mouthful. So I'm going to say it one more time after this, but in the interest of time, henceforward, I'm just going to say, with great power. Is everybody cool with that? Okay, cool. Okay, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. It's perhaps one of the most profound and meaningful statements in all of comics that resonates with just about everyone. It's an important moral lesson and has as much relevance today, and some would say even more today, than it did 60 years ago when it was introduced in the Spider-Man comic. In recent years, it's been quoted by presidents, congressmen, Supreme Court justices, as well as publications such as Forbes and Time magazine, and believe it or not, the Wikipedia content guidelines. And, let's be real here, folks. They're not quoting some earlier version of the statement when they're saying that. It goes all the way back, arguably, to the Bible. They're quoting Spider-Man. Now, I want to start off this morning with a trivia question. Who can tell me when was the first time that with great power was ever uttered in a Spider-Man comic? Okay, someone just say it.
Amazing Fantasy 15.
Yeah, Amazing Fantasy 15. Yeah, that was, pretty easy.
Sort of.
Pretty easy. Most of you probably read this within the last month. Okay, let me give you a much more difficult question. When was the second time it was uttered in a regular Spider-Man comic? Okay.
Amazing Fantasy 50.
Amazing Fantasy 50? No, I don't think there even was an Amazing Fantasy. No, it's not. It actually isn't. Anyone?
It was after the Spider-Man movie.
It's after the movie. It's like
After the movie came out.
It's not after the movie came out. Okay, one more.
The first annual?
No, that's close, but that's close. Okay, it was actually Amazing Spider-Man 200 from January 1980, nearly 18 years later. Now, I'll give you a couple caveats on that, though. It did appear in the first issue of the black and white Spectacular Spider-Man magazine from 1968. It also appeared in the 1968 episode of the 1967 Spider-Man cartoon. We also get it in the October 29th, 1977 edition of the Amazing Spider-Man newspaper strip, and 2 LP records. The Amazing Spider-Man, a rock comic, and the Spider-Man rock reflections of a superhero. Okay, but with the exception of the first LP there, every time it was used, it was always in a retelling of the origin or a framing sequence around the retelling of the origin. Amazing Spider-Man 200 is the first time we start to see it break out and be used in part of a new story. Additionally, we have quite a few early retellings of the origin which omit the phrase entirely, including Spider-Man 1, Amazing Spider-Man 50, Amazing Spider-Man 94, Amazing Spider-Man 181 rather. Spidey Super Stories #1, the 1977 pilot for the CBS television show, and this 1980 Origin of Spider-Man poster. I actually have one of those in my basement. It's really cool. Even more so, we have quite a few key moments in early issues of The Amazing Spider-Man where with great power is curiously absent, including The Amazing Spider-Man #3, the first annual, as someone said, Amazing Spider-Man 33, Amazing Spider-Man 50, the third annual, and Amazing Spider-Man 100. Now, a lot of these are they're begging for it, really. You would think they'd want to recall this. These are always cases where either Peter has some crisis of conscience or he is lamenting and struggling with doubts about Spider-Man. It would have been a perfect place to recall this if it had been a priority in the narrative. So for nearly the first 25 years, With Great Power barely exists, other than as an addendum to his origin sometimes. And, it's never really given any emphasis by the creators. And this was back before we had collected editions and Marvel handbooks and digital comics and the internet. It was very possible for someone to be a longtime Spider-Man reader and never have come across the phrase. So this notion that a lot of people think that With Great Power has always been a really important core part of the character that people readily associate with the character, it's really a big Mandela effect. It just was not something that was emphasized for almost the first half of the character's existence. To reiterate this even more, starting in 1974 with Amazing Spider-Man 136, we started to have these recap origin boxes at the beginning. Now you'll notice With Great Power is not there. We don't actually start to see With Great Power included till 1997 with Amazing Spider-Man 425. Now those of you who with really detailed long memories might remember that was back when Marvel was doing the kind of two-page flip-out thing from the front cover that retold the origin. Not just the origin, but recap the previous issue. And when we actually get a more traditional recap box back in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2, number 11 in 1999, we now, going forward, have With Great Power included, and it has been henceforth. And, of course, I hasten to mention that as soon as Clifford Robertson sat in Sam Raimi's car and uttered that famous line, it was forever cemented in pop culture and the broader public consciousness. However, if we wish to view With Great Power as the theme, there are even more problems than just its prominence for the first half of the character's existence. Firstly, the notion of power, as we look at it today, presumes a significant level of privilege. And it's quite difficult to reconcile this as the theme for a character who's really supposed to be the focal character and the everyman of a comics line that's supposed to look more like the world outside your window. Peter Parker is supposed to be relatable. He starts out as an average kid from Queens. Okay, sure, he's a gifted nerd, but folks, we're sitting in a room full of gifted nerds. Own it. And we won, by the way. Secondly, With Great Power is a lesson learned at the beginning of his career and internalized. If we have to keep on going back to the same lesson over and over again, or make him have to relearn it time and time again, it completely contradicts the well-established notion that Peter Parker is a highly intelligent character. Smart people shouldn't have to learn the same lesson over and over again. So for all of these reasons, I have to reject the idea that With Great Power is actually the theme of Spider-Man. If you look at the entirety of Spider-Man's publication history, a narrative and thematic through line emerges, which is less about With Great Power and more about a protagonist that keeps on having bad things happen to him, but is able to persevere through adversity and inevitably heroically triumph over it. That Spider-Man keeps on metaphorically getting knocked down, perhaps even more so than any other character in comics, but keeps on picking himself back up again, particularly when others need saving. Now, the number of bad things that have happened to Spider-Man, there's a heck of a lot. I'm going to give you a brief list here. First of all, before the comic even begins, his parents are killed when he's a baby. Obviously, Uncle Ben gets killed as part of his origin. His secret identity drives a wedge between him and his first love, Betty Brant, causing him to lose her. Okay, then the radiation in a blood transfusion that he gave to save Aunt May's life ends up poisoning her, leaving her on her deathbed. The experimental isotope that Peter needs to save Aunt May's life is stolen by Doc Ock, leading Spider-Man to a collapse that becomes an underwater death trap, where not only is his life on the line, but also Aunt May's. And then we have his arch nemesis, Green Goblin, discovers his secret identity and tries to kill him right outside of his house. His girlfriend's father, Captain Stacy, who's become Peter's friend and almost a stand-in father figure, is killed, and the world, including Gwen, thinks that Spider-Man is responsible. Peter's roommate and best friend, Harry Osborn, gets hooked on drugs and later follows in his footsteps, becoming the second Green Goblin. His girlfriend, Gwen Stacy, is killed after being thrown off a bridge by the original Green Goblin. Peter will never know whether or not it was his intervention in trying to save her that ultimately caused her death. He discovers that his nifty alien costume is actually a highly evolved alien symbiote that wants to permanently bond to him. It later devolves into the homicidal monster known as Venom. And then we have... Okay, I'm sorry. Craven the Hunter hunts down drugs and buries Peter alive in a grave for 2 weeks. Afterwards, Craven commits suicide, having successfully completed his final hunt. And then we have the Clone Saga. And the Clone Saga. And 2.5 years later, the Clone Saga. Peter finds out that years ago, Gwen Stacy had an affair with Norman Osborn, producing twins. Just about everybody hated that one. Tony Stark convinces Peter Parker to go public with his secret identity. This leads the Kingpin to make an assassination attempt on Peter, which mortally wounds Aunt May. Peter and Mary Jane sacrifice their love and marriage to the demon Mephisto to save Aunt May's life. Peter and Doc Ock are permanently body swapped just before Doc Ock's body dies, leading to the Doc Ock Spider-Man, the superior Spider-Man. Peter blows up his multi-billion-dollar company, Parker Industries, deactivating its most popular webware product to prevent Doc Ock from taking control of the company. Peter is humiliated when it is discovered that the PhD that Doc Ock earned for him while Doc Ock occupied his body was actually plagiarized from Octavius's earlier work. I knew that would get some groans from the audience. And here we have the Spider-Man death list. Now, I am not going to read these all off to you, but if you're a friend of Peter Parker, I would not start reading any long novels if I were you. And my personal favorite, that time that Peter Parker was homeless, slept in an alley, and had his costume stolen while he was asleep. You can't get much lower than that, folks. But these are just kind of the big things. Peter Parker is more often portrayed as someone who shows resilience and struggles, often through no fault of his own, in the day-to-day aspects of his life. He can never get ahead. While Peter Parker is always catching a bad break, he doesn't break bad. Unlike Walter White, he doesn't use his knowledge of science and chemistry to start an illegal drug empire. But this bad luck that he has is colloquially referred to in story as the Parker luck, and Peter Parker is the original hard luck kid. Let's see. A large part of this is due to how his co-creator and original scripter Stan Lee loved to torture his most relatable and beloved character for dramatic purposes. According to Stan Lee, quote, "I liked the idea of his aunt as surviving and making her always ill, so that because to keep a story interesting, one of the things that you can do with a character is put him in a situation where he needs to make a life choice. For example, if he goes north, he can fight a villain that's about to blow up the world. But if he heads south, he can reach a drugstore that has the life-saving medicine that his aunt needs within the hour. Now, he can't do both. Is he going to let the world get blown up, or is he going to let his aunt die? What does he do?" When you can get situations like that, you know you're going to hold the reader's interest. The flip side, end quote, by the way, the flip side of this is that Peter manages to keep on going no matter what. Regardless of how many times Aunt May is sick and in the hospital, or how many times he's flat broke and is struggling to help Aunt May pay the bills, or how many times J. Jonah Jameson has convinced New York City that he's a criminal and a menace, he keeps on going. To quote longtime writer of various incarnations of Spider-Man, Brian Michael Bendis, when he was asked about the motivations for the aftermath of the 2008 Secret Invasion event, which concluded with Norman Osborn being placed in charge of S.H.I.E.L.D. and most of our heroes under threat, quote, it was more about the fact that a lot of our heroes were going to end up having a kind of Peter Parker year. Peter Parker is a very special guy that can handle that kind of thing. Let's say Luke Cage might not be. You know, the even when you win, you lose kind of thing. Some people might not handle that at all, and that's very interesting, end quote. It's easy for readers to relate to someone who's had a string of bad luck. Everyone has had a case of the Parker luck at one time or another, and even if we haven't had a Parker year, we've at least had a Parker week or a Parker day. While we relate to and empathize with his struggles as readers, we also get to celebrate and be inspired by him surmounting them. Peter Parker really is a special kind of guy. His ability to continually overcome the adversity has made him endearing to and an inspiration for his readers for the last 60 years. While with great power there must also come great responsibility is an important lesson that he learned and a profound piece of wisdom. It's not the main theme. The real theme of Spider-Man is expressed through Peter's ability to keep on picking himself back up no matter what obstacles he may face. Thank you.
Quick note here. I did not have the permission of the other panel members on my panel to record their responses to questions. So in most cases, I have edited out their responses as much as possible, with the exception of some points where some people talk over each other. So please bear with us as we go into the questions and answers. Thank you.
Regarding the with great power comes great responsibility thing, talk about the Mandela effect. The evolution of it being linked to Uncle Ben, because like initially it wasn't Uncle Ben that said it, but now like it's kind of canon, you know, that like it was a wise lesson that like Uncle Ben said to him, and I think that that originated in the Spider-Man versus Wolverine one shot from '86 or '87.
Kind of.
Yeah, but I'd love to hear you like speak to that.
Sure.
Okay,
well, the first time it actually got linked with Uncle Ben, believe it or not, was in that really funky Spider-Man or Rock comic record from 1972. I mean, you might as well have called it Peter Spider Superstar. It was, you know, it was way out there, but they kind of used a device, Peter Parker having a nightmare or a hallucination where a dead Uncle Ben was calling out to him and talking to him, and he's the one who told him with great power, great responsibility in that. And then I think technically before the Spider-Man Wolverine thing, there was an issue, I think it was 274, that was a tie-in to Secret Wars 2, where you had It was like, I don't even know what it was. It was some kind of Beyonder construct that looked like Uncle Ben for a little bit and said it to him. And then you had it in the Spider-Man Wolverine comic. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it's just interesting how it's gotten like linked over time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, once they do it in the movie, forget it. That's what everyone is always going to believe for all time.
Great discussion. Other questions that folks have? Gosh, there's so many. We'll go right in the back row there. Yes, sir, you, sir.
If you were going to predict where Spider-Man's going in the future, in 10 years from now, can any of you have an idea where you think it's going to trend, since it's evolved so many years?
I would say that comics are very cyclical, and as he said, the Stan Lee quote, they trade on the illusion of change. I think 10 years from now, you'll probably have the Spider-Marriage back, and a lot of characters that are dead now will be back, and a lot of characters that aren't dead now will be dead then. So, and, rinse and repeat, folks, and you get a little bit more with each turning.
So we'll see another Clone Wars, right?
Yes.
We actually already have.
Yeah, there's been at least 4.
Clone Conspiracy.
Of course.
And I guess this is mostly for Madeline, but the issue of identity, and I keep thinking about like when Miles Morales first came out, and some people freaked out and said, "Oh my God, a black Spider-Man," and then suddenly there's a female Spider-Man, and all these other things. And I do think in the trans stuff from the film, is really interesting, and I just wondered what your thoughts were, because it seems that there's a portion of our society that wants to keep things the way they were, that Peter Parker is only it, and Peter Parker was never just a singular character, but now that it's, opened up so that everybody can identify in a more direct way, I'm wondering how that, how do you see that fitting in with the culture wars?
Can I add something here? One of the things that I think of when we talk about the multiple identities, there was a very important point. It wasn't with Marvel, it was actually with DC and Warner's. They used to, both DC and Marvel used to have style guides that they would put out to do merchandising. And at some point in the late 90s, DC and Warner Brothers hit on the idea that we can have more than one style guide out there simultaneously, and it was for Batman. And that opens up the idea that, hey, we can sell more merchandise because we have multiple style guides, and then everyone starts to pick up onto it. So I think that's really what opened it up for multiple identities, that the idea that, hey, they can make a lot more money off of this if they can do that.
Do you guys think that would these characters be as successful if they weren't tied to Spider-Man? I'll tell you, I'm an old comic book guy, and it gets depressing when it seems like all of DC Comics is Batman every week.
It is.
So, for me, there's too many Robins, there's too many Superboys. I understand that these are properties that you have to tie into something, but would these characters be as popular as could they be as successful if there wasn't the Spider connection? If you introduce Miles Morales, saying, wasn't Spider-Man, come up with,
I have this kind of crackpot thumbnail theory that I'm working on, the idea that for a completely new character, I think it takes about 20 to 25 years for them to gestate. You don't see Harley Quinn blow up really huge when she first comes out. It's about 20 years later. You don't see that happen with Ghost Rider or Wolverine or many of these characters. It actually takes a while, and a lot of times it takes another generation of creators who grew up reading them originally take them forward. So you can get the companies can get the instant gratification of the big sales from a derivative or legacy character. I don't think you can really get that out of a new character. It takes a while for them to kind of sit.